Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. One of our country's largest ever strikes continues as federal workers are picketing in more than 250 locations across the country. Lethbridge MP Rachel Thomas says some NDP MPs appear to be two-faced when it comes to their actions versus their words. And the National Citizens Inquiry into the government's handling of the pandemic continues, this time in Saskatoon.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Federal workers continue their strike at more than 250 locations across Canada as part of job action by the Public Service Alliance of Canada. It's day 2 of the walkout, which came after bargaining groups failed to come to an agreement over a few sticking points, including wages. PSAC's national president told reporters, enough's enough. Both the union and the federal government are warning of major service disruptions as a result of the strike. Conservative MP Stephanie Kusi asked Prime Minister Justin Trudeau why the Liberals have been unable to get a deal done to avoid this massive public service strike. The PM responded by saying his government supports the unionized workers.
Since 2015, this Prime Minister has spent $21 billion more on the public service and $22 billion on outside consultants. And yet he wasn't capable of negotiating an agreement with the public service. And Mr. Speaker, it's Canadians who are suffering, Canadians who are not receiving their passports, Canadians' loved ones whose immigration processes will be elongated, and it's Canadians who will not receive their tax refunds. Mr. Speaker, will this Prime Minister take responsibility and apologize not only to public service but to Canadians for failing to reach a negotiation?
We know all too well what the Conservative playbook would be on this. Back to work legislation even before the picket lines were brought up. That's what they've done before. That's their go-to on this. On this side of the House, we actually respect and work with unions as partners. We respect the right to collective bargaining. We have been at the table working constructively. They continue to be at the table right now in constructive conversations, and we will continue to be there to make sure that Canadians get the services they need and public servants continue to get the respect they deserve but that they don't get from Conservatives.
The Public Service Alliance of Canada's national president, Chris Aylward, spoke to a crowd of striking federal workers in Ottawa. He says his members have simply had enough.
When this government suppresses wages for its own employees, what they're doing is suppressing wages for every single worker in this country, and we're going to say we're not going to do it.
Workers were talking about how many of them are really low paid. These are some of the workers that, when you think of public sector unions, people don't realize there's a lot of workers that are not actually very well paid, that have not had raises for a while and have not been able to keep up with inflation.
Members of the Public Service Alliance of Canada in Lethbridge are continuing to protest as they too are participating in a nationwide strike. This has many people wondering how this will impact things such as receiving tax refunds in a timely manner or how the strike may impact border crossings. Angela Stewart has that story.
Well, dozens of federal public service workers are back on the picket lines for day 2 here in Lethbridge for what is being called the biggest strike in Canadian history. Outside of the Service Canada building, employees with the Public Service Alliance of Canada continue to fight for a fair deal Thursday.
We've had great turnout, great participation, great energy from the members. We're actually having a good time making the best of a bad situation.
More than 155,000 workers across the country have been on strike since Wednesday after contract talks fell short and a deal was not met by the April 18th deadline.
The employees that work for Canada Revenue Agency were in collective bargaining for 2 years, and the employer never put a wage offer on the table.
The strike, although happening in the middle of tax season, specialists with H&R Block Canada anticipate the only impacts would be the calculations of benefits and credits in the future.
For example, GST or the incentive, climate incentive, or even old age pensions, but that's yet to be determined. As of right now, it's business as usual.
Workers who are on strike make up about 17.6% of the Canada Border Service Agency employees. In a statement, the agency says they do not provide direct frontline operational services like processing travelers and commercial goods. Services to travelers and businesses will be maintained. Back at the strike, the union would also like to see proper work-life balance, job security, and remote work be negotiated. Well, the group isn't sure how long they will be on strike for, but they hope their employer will be able to come to the bargaining table with a proper collective agreement. For Bridge City News, I'm Angela Stewart.
NDP Labour critic Alexander Boulerice has brought forth a private member's bill he says will protect airport workers' jobs. Boulerice says this new bill will correct a loophole in the Canadian Labour Code which addresses contract slipping. He explains exactly what that is.
When there's a bid and a new company gets a contract in an airport, the collective agreement suddenly disappeared, and the workers, they have reduction in their working conditions and their wages, which is completely unacceptable. And we do not see that anywhere else in Canada, in fact, in working relation. So we need to fix that. And my private member bill is, really a good solution. And I'm asking Seamus O'Regan to take it and to put it in a government bill, so those workers will be respected and their working condition will be maintained.
Lethbridge MP Rachel Thomas says it appears as though the NDP MPs say one thing but do another on Parliament Hill. She says that almost comes across somewhat two-faced.
All day long, I listen to NDP members get up and rail on the government, either because there were things in the budget that they disagreed with, or there were things missing from the budget that they were hoping would be there. And so they spent the entire day debating and making points against the government. And then in the evening, it came for a vote. And what did the NDP do? They stood in favor with the government. So I find it interesting then that we have a party that is willing to speak out of one side of their face against the government, but then out of the other side of their face, they're willing to speak in favor of the government in the sense of a vote.
MP Rachel Thomas will also give us her thoughts on the Katie Telford testimony at the inquiry into foreign election interference. She'll have details coming up in the second half of our program. The National Citizens Inquiry into the pandemic made its way to Saskatoon, Saskatchewan on Thursday. The inquiry, separate from the government, is being led by Canadians who are investigating the government's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. One of the witnesses on Thursday was Dr. Francis Christian. Dr. Christian has been a surgeon for 25 years and was the clinical professor of surgery at the University of Saskatchewan. Dr. Christian says he's disappointed at the way the government pushed the COVID-19 vaccines onto kids. When he spoke out, he was fired.
In the spring of 2021, the government rolled out the COVID injection to our children. And that was being done in what I would call warp speed. And I decided that I couldn't stay silent anymore because children don't have voices and we have to be their voice. So I had a press conference in which I asked for something which shouldn't really be controversial, and that is informed consent. I pointed out what informed consent in the COVID era looks like and what informed consent for the injection should look like. And I had this press conference, which was actually well attended by the local press. And 1 week later, I was called into a meeting and fired from my contract.
The hearings will continue in Saskatoon Friday and Saturday before moving on to Red Deer, Alberta, April 26th through the 28th. Well, it looked more like winter as opposed to spring here in Lethbridge today. We saw a couple of centimeters of the white stuff. Jeanette Roche is now with an early peek at the forecast. Jeanette, please tell me the snow will be ending and then melting fairly soon?
Soon, Hal, but maybe not as soon enough, as we are expected to see a slight chance of flurries in the region this evening and again on Friday afternoon. I know here I thought we were all finished with the snow, but the good news is I'm trying to remain positive here because we are expecting some double digits and some sunshine on the weekend. Best news of all, we could see temperatures up into the 20s by next week. So here's hoping for that. I'll be back later in the show to give you all those details. Hal?
Great. Thanks so much, Jeanette. The regimental funeral for the Alberta RCMP officer who died over a week ago took place in Sherwood Park, Alberta earlier today. Constable Harvinder Singh Dhami, a member of the Strathcona County Detachment east of Edmonton, died while driving to assist his colleagues with a noise complaint. RCMP said Dommy's vehicle hit a large concrete barrier on a road northeast of Sherwood Park in the early morning hours of April the 10th. His brother, who's also a police officer, spoke at a celebration of life service.
It is with the utmost pride that I can say Constable Harvinder Dommy was my younger brother. The last time I stood in front of a large group of people to speak about Harv was when I delivered my best man speech at his wedding. And now I stand here today in front of all of you to deliver his eulogy and to pay tribute to his life. My brother was a remarkable human being, a loyal and devoted husband, son, brother, uncle, and friend. He was the very essence of what it is to be a good, kind, and compassionate person.
A funeral procession for Dommy took place at the Bethel Lutheran Church in Sherwood Park and ended at the Millennium Place Recreation Center, where private service was held. Jim Penny, a huge name in the Lethbridge community, has passed away at the age of 96. Penny was the past president of the Lethbridge and District Exhibition in the mid-1980s. Penny and his wife Hazel were originally from Saskatchewan and devoted a lot of their careers to developing restaurant franchises in both Canada and the U.S. They ran Dairy Queen franchises in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Idaho, and Washington State. In 2012, the Penny family gifted the Capitol Furniture Building to the University of Lethbridge. It's also now known as the Dr. Foster James Penny Building in honor of their son, who passed away at the age of 44 from ALS, or otherwise known as Lou Gehrig's disease. Lethbridge and District Exhibition CEO Mike Workington said Penny helped lay the groundwork for the exhibition that we know so well today.
He built the North Pavilion, and so he was very instrumental, I should say, in making sure that the North Pavilion got built. And so it was always very refreshing to talk to him. And over the past couple of years, we haven't had as much opportunity, but he always stayed connected and always wanted to know what was going on here. And we'd chat a couple times a year, but nothing but respect from our organization for what he did. And he ultimately was one of the key figures in paving the way for the exhibition of the future and where we're going as an organization.
Penny is also credited for bringing the first Taco Time franchise to Canada way back in 1978. Workington says flags at the Lethbridge and District Exhibition have been lowered to half-mast in his honor. Our Lady of the Assumption School in Lethbridge hosted a very special event on Thursday steeped in Metis culture. Around 150 students gathered at the gym of the school. As BCN's Micah Quinn explains now, organizers of the school-led initiative introduced us to Michigan, and we find out what it's all about.
Traditional Métis dancers gathered at the Our Lady of the Assumption School on Thursday morning, teaching students the jig. Jorn Gadet, a teacher at the school, talked to us about the kitchen party, which is called a Michigan.
Kitchen party is a tradition that the Métis people have where you get together in the kitchen and you share food, you listen to music, you play instruments, so the fiddle being the main one. And it's really about getting together and sharing in those Métis traditional values, which is the relationship with one another, celebrating the music, celebrating with food, and just really joining together as a family.
Megan Calder, the principal of the school, says they have a very diverse student population, including some that are Indigenous and Métis.
They're sponges, right? Like they're always open to learning about new ideas, new things, new cultures, new ways of doing and knowing. And so when you couple that with some physical activity and some great music and some guests, it's really easy to get involved and to learn and to do all of those things together.
According to members of the Lethbridge local Métis, there are currently over 2,000 people who self-identify as Métis in our city. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
That's pretty cool. The government of British Columbia introduced legislation to ensure that type 2 diabetes patients do not face a shortage of the drug Ozempic. It's been touted for its weight loss side effects and the recent focus of the sale of more than 17,000 Canadian doses to patients in the United States.
The new regulations will prevent any new online or mail order sales of semaglutide to people who do not reside in Canada and who are not in BC to make the purchase. The BC College of Pharmacists will be responsible for ensuring its registrants comply with this new regulation. I want to thank the college for its commitment to working with the provincial government to ensure that all new regulatory requirements are met and that practice standards continue to be followed by every pharmacist in BC.
RCMP are warning motorists about travel in southeastern Saskatchewan as snowfall blankets much of the province. Mounties say in just 60 minutes they received more than 50 calls because of poor road conditions. Police say they were also called because of a collision between a semi-trailer and a charter bus on Highway 1 east of Sintaluta that left one man in serious condition. Mounties say if drivers need help from police, tow truck drivers, or other emergency services, there may be delays because of the poor road conditions. At least 70 people were killed and dozens of others were injured in a stampede at an event to distribute financial aid to those in Yemen's capital city. Witnesses say shots were fired in the air in an attempt to control the crowd, but the bullets hit an electrical wire, which then caught fire. The Houthi-run government says a couple of organizers were arrested and an investigation is underway. Yemen's capital has been controlled by Iranian-backed Houthi rebels since 2014 after they took out their internationally recognized government. SpaceX's giant new rocket blasted off on its very first test flight on Thursday, but unfortunately it failed and exploded minutes after rising from the launch pad.
We're throttled down and throttled back up.
Yeah, it does appear to be spinning, but I do want to remind everyone that everything after clearing the tower was icing on the cake.
Fortunately, no one was inside the rocket, or none of the debris hit anyone on the ground either. Well, it was a snow globe kind of a day in many parts of southwestern Alberta today. Unfortunately, the snow is on its way out, and we should be seeing warmer temperatures as we make our way to the weekend. Complete weather details are coming up. We had a couple of centimeters of snow today in Lethbridge. Hey, I'm so looking forward to shoveling my driveway once again after work. Not. Jeanette Rocher is now with all of the weather details. Jeanette, I had to check my calendar to make sure this is the third week of April and not January.
I know. I think winter has not gotten the memo that it has overstayed its welcome. We are looking at another 30% chance of flurries overnight into Friday. Also 30% chance of flurries by Friday afternoon. High of 5 degrees. Here's the good news though. Saturday and Sunday we're looking at highs of 10 degrees for both days. Mix of sun and cloud. Down to 8 on Monday. Back up to 15. And there we go. We're almost at 19 degrees by Wednesday. So we're getting pretty close to those 20s. Excited for that to happen. Average high for this time of year 14 degrees, average low was 0. 27 was our high temperature on this day back in 1980, and the record low was -9. That was 1951 that happened. Sun rose this morning at 6:29 a.m. and the sun set this evening at 8:32 p.m., giving us 14 hours and 3 minutes of daylight. Okay, on the west coast tomorrow, we're seeing a 30% chance of showers in both Victoria and Vancouver. Tomorrow, Victoria's high 10 degrees, 11 for a high in Vancouver. Both of those cities sitting at 20 winds. Tomorrow, 5 degrees for a high in Edmonton with a mix of sun and cloud. Calgary looking at a high of 4 degrees as well. As we move into the rest of the prairies, Saskatoon's high for tomorrow looking at 1 degree, mainly cloudy skies. Regina seeing some periods of light snow, 0 for a high as we're still seeing that slow moving disturbance moving into southern Manitoba. Winnipeg expecting close to 10 to 20 centimeters overnight, but by tomorrow those periods of light flurries should be a scattering. 1 degree for a high tomorrow. Into the central part of the country, Toronto looking at a slight chance of showers. Could also see a possibility of a thunderstorm later on in the day. High of 20 degrees though, 16 for a high in Ottawa, also seeing some showers, and a high of 16 as well in Montreal. Looking at mix of sun and cloud there. Into Atlantic Canada, Fredericton sitting at 12 degrees, mainly sunny skies. A fairly decent day as well in Halifax, looking at double digits as well. 10 degrees for a high, 5 for a high in Charlottetown, and St. John's looking at 2 to 4 millimeters of rain, and that could be mixed with some snow there. High of 2 degrees. There you have it. That is your forecast.
Today's weather report is brought to you by Ridge Utilities, providing competitive rates for electricity, natural gas, and internet, while investing back in communities across southern Alberta.
Michelin is recalling more than 542,000 snow tires because they don't have enough traction to work in all snow conditions. The recall covers certain Agilis cross-climate C-metric tires that the company says do not meet federal snow tire safety standards. Now, the tire manufacturer says in documents released by safety regulators in the United States that tires without sufficient traction can increase the risk of a crash. Dealers will replace the tires at no cost to consumers. Celiac Canada is asking the federal government for a special rebate and tax credit to help with the rising cost of groceries. The group says gluten-free products cost between 150% to 500% more than those containing gluten. Some Canadians say they spend more on groceries than on their mortgage payments because of celiac disease. The disease, in which gluten causes damage to the small intestine, has no cure or treatment. Some farmers in Iowa have come up with a low-tech remedy for the nitrate pollution affecting waterways in the region. They say systems called bioreactors and stream-side buffers help to filter nitrates from water runoff before it can reach rivers and streams.
So this is a low-impact thing for us on our farm, but it has a high impact downstream. So taking the nitrates out of the water, again, we sit right north of the Des Moines watershed, so we want to make sure that that water is in good a shape as possible for the population of Des Moines. So we want to kind of take advantage of a simple practice that helps remove those nitrates.
So nitrates are really important for the crops that we grow here in Iowa and throughout the United States, and they're really important for plants to make sure that they're strong and healthy. But the problem is when they enter a creek or a stream where they aren't supposed to be. And so we're trying to make sure that the nitrates stay on the ground, and if not, then they're treated before they enter the creek.
Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 50 points on the day to finish at 20,630. The Dow was down 110 points to 33,786. The S&P 500 was down 24 on the day to 4129, and the Nasdaq was down 97 points to 12,059. West Texas Intermediate Oil was down $1.87 to $77.29 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 4 cents to $2.19 US. Gold was down a cent to $2,004.79 US an ounce, and silver was also down a cent at $25.29 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $11.35 per bushel, barley's at $9.14, canola's at $17.25, and corn is at $10.49 per bushel. Live cattle were down $1.33 to $174.10. Feeder cattle were up 35 cents to $205.03, and lean hogs May contract was down $1.95 to $76.83. The Canadian dollar was down slightly over the past 24 hours to $74.19 US. Recapping one of our top stories, federal workers continue their strike in more than 250 locations across Canada as part of job action by the Public Service Alliance of Canada. It is day 2 of the walkout, which came after bargaining groups failed to come to an agreement over a few sticking points, including wages. PSAC's national president told reporters that enough is enough. Both the union and the federal government are warning of major service disruptions as a result of the strike. The government is getting that much closer to a bill which would have a major impact on what you see and are allowed to post online. Lethbridge MP Rachel Thomas, who is also our country's heritage critic, will have details for us momentarily. If you see news happening in your community, be sure to drop us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. We'd love to hear from you.
Here's today's Bridge City News community calendar. Saturday is Earth Day, and the city of Lethbridge is providing a way to keep harmful items out of the landfill. So on April 22nd, residents can drop off unused household cleaning supplies, solvents, oil, paint, and old electronics for free between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. at the NMAX Center. The Toxic and E-Waste Roundup is for residential household hazardous waste and electronic waste only. For more information, visit lethbridge.ca or call 311. Big Brothers Big Sisters in Lethbridge is looking for volunteers to mentor children and youth in their various programs. Volunteers commit to 1 visit per week for 1 year. They have many kids that are looking for a big brother or sister. Make a difference in a child's life and start something big. To apply, visit lethbridge.bigbrothersbigsisters.ca or for more information, call 403-328-9355. And that's today's Bridge City News Community Calendar.
There's some talk that the federal government may look into taking resource rights away from the provinces. In Alberta, of course, we've got a lot of oil and gas here and other important resources. That could be quite concerning. Now, to talk about this in more detail is Lethbridge MP Rachel Thomas, who joins us now from Ottawa. Rachel, welcome back to Bridge City News.
Thanks, Hal. Great to be with you.
Yeah, you as well. Now, Rachel, Justice Minister David Lametti let it slip that the Trudeau Liberals should look into stripping resource rights away from the provinces. How concerned should we really be with this?
Yeah, Hal, I think it's important to start on the premise that, we live in an incredible province with incredible resources. And of course, the 4 prairie provinces can all boast the same. But here in Alberta, we have something particularly special, and that is, of course, access to oil and gas. And when we develop our natural resources, we do so with some of the highest environmental practices in the world, with some of the most ethical practices in the world, and then, of course, some of the highest wages in the world. And so these 3 things really set us apart when it comes to natural resource development. So instead of attacking that, I would be of the opinion that really Mr. Lametti should be praising that. He should be celebrating what's possible, within our prairie provinces and I dare say across the country. Not only that, but when these resources are developed, that results in dollars being spent on important infrastructure projects, as well, here in the province of Alberta, but then also, it benefits the entire country as a whole. Whether that's through transfer payments or other ways, through taxation also. So all of that is to say, when the natural resource sector is strong, Canada is strong. So for the minister to say such a thing was just absolute ludicrous. It's incredibly divisive. It's incredibly dangerous. And the big reason why is not only because he's going after the industry, and in particular going after the 4 prairie provinces, but it's particularly dangerous because he's actually saying that the government is going to look into unilaterally changing the Constitution. Since when is it okay for a government to exert itself in such a capacity? So all that to say, I'm really proud of our leader, Pierre Poilievre, who has come out very strongly against Mr. Lametti's statement and is very much a proponent of leaving things with the provinces to determine on their own.
Rachel, senators returned to the upper chamber and quickly began debating a motion that would see the Senate accept Bill C-11, the Online Streaming Act, without insisting on further changes. Now, as our country's heritage critic, you say this raises a red flag. Why is that?
Yeah, certainly. So, viewers will recall that Bill C-11 is the government's online censorship bill. So really, with this bill, the government is giving itself the ability to control what Canadians can see, hear, and post online. Essentially, it will break our search bars. So when we go on YouTube looking for videos we want to see, instead of that, it'll be videos the government wants us to see. When we look for content using a Google search bar, and again, looking for things we want to find, instead, it'll be things that the government would prefer we look at. This is dangerous. This is incredibly dangerous. There have been some legal experts who have said this takes us down a path toward becoming like China or North Korea, Russia, or Iran. Obviously, these are countries we do not want to liken to when it comes to respect for constitutional rights. So at the end of the day, this bill has it went from the House of Commons over to the Senate. The Senate made some changes, sent it back to the House of Commons. The government rejected the vast majority of those Senate changes, which is very unfortunate because, of course, the Senate exists to be a sober second thought. And some of their amendments were great and they should have been accepted. And so it was really sad that the government rejected those. The Senate now is looking at the bill once again. And the supposedly independent senators have said that they're simply going to let it pass as is. They're not going to fight the fight any further, which I think is a really sad day for Canadians, because I think we depend on those who are given a position of authority to defend us. We depend on them to do so. And unfortunately, the supposedly independent senators are choosing to abdicate their voice and their responsibility by pushing through a piece of legislation that they know, by their own admission, is incredibly dangerous and will harm Canadians. That said, I would encourage audience members certainly to still continue to have a voice on this. I think we still have an opportunity to write to senators and to urge them, please vote no to this. Do not let this piece of legislation pass as is, because it is incredibly harmful to Canadians.
Rachel, Canadian farmers are applauding the passage of Bill C-234. It exempts farm fuels from the federal government's carbon tax. How important is this really for our agricultural communities, especially here in southwestern Alberta?
I can only comment on what I'm hearing from farmers themselves. I think that's probably, the best voice to listen to. I know that this bill means a lot to them. So this bill comes from my colleague, Ben Lobb, a Conservative member of Parliament here in the House of Commons who serves with me. It was his idea. He drove it forward and ultimately gained the support of the NDP and the Bloc, and we were successful in putting it through. That being the case, it is of tremendous benefit to farmers because we know that these are the men and women who work remarkably hard to serve our country, to make sure that we're fed, but not only us, but to make sure that the world is fed. And this is something to be celebrated. And unfortunately, we have a government that chooses not to. Instead, they like to put policies in place that are incredibly restrictive toward farmers, if not an outright attack, whether it's, regulations regarding fertilizer or the carbon tax. So the fact that, my colleague has been so successful in getting this bill through and farmers will now be exempt from the carbon tax being applied to their fuel, I think it's just a huge win for farmers. And certainly they've spoken out and given a significant endorsement of this legislation.
Let's talk about that carbon tax. Went up again April 1st. How damaging has it been for families across the country?
Yeah, and again, a very important question because we know that the carbon tax impacts all of us, whether it's our home heating or the cost of groceries that we're purchasing at the store, or the fuel that we put in our vehicles to drive to work or take our kids to sport practice. The carbon tax is applied to literally everything that we depend on in life in one form or another. The carbon tax is something that, this Liberal government is very committed to. They like to virtue signal that they care about the environment and therefore are applying this carbon tax. But yet when we look at the metrics, when we actually look at whether or not they're hitting the environmental targets that they've set for themselves, we see that they're not. They haven't met a single environmental target during their entire 8 years in government. So it's simply more rhetoric. And at the end of the day, it's purely punitive toward Canadians because it's not actually accomplishing, what it was supposed to be. So at the end of the day, we're huge proponents on our side of scrapping the carbon tax and putting practices in place that are common sense and that will actually make a real difference in terms of making sure that we're stewarding our earth.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's Chief of Staff, Katie Telford, was called to testify recently into foreign election interference. Now, you're not happy with what you heard from Ms. Telford. Can you explain why?
So I had the opportunity to be at committee just last week, and during the committee, of course, Ms. Telford, the Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister, testified. I guess I could sum it up as this. I would say she certainly engaged in tactics of avoidance and deflection, half answers. And so it was very, very difficult to get a sense of what is true and what is not. That said, there were a couple of statements that she made very emphatically that I think are quite telling. One of them, she said that the Prime Minister reads everything that is put in front of him. The other statement that she made is that nothing is ever withheld from the Prime Minister. Nothing is ever kept from the Prime Minister. What this tells us then is if he has access to all information and if he reads all information given to him, then he must have known. He must have known that there was Beijing interference in both the 2019 and 2021 elections. The reason we know he must have known is because he reads everything and nothing is kept from him. And we know that CSIS, our foremost intelligence agency in this country, put forward reports to his office. So therefore, we can only conclude that the Prime Minister was aware and chose to turn a blind eye to the fact that this interference was taking place. Why would he do that? Because we have it on record in these CSIS reports that Beijing wanted the Liberals to win and was putting money in those ridings illegally, and Beijing businesses were hiring interns to place them on campaigns in order to help Liberal candidates. So at the end of the day, we're led to conclude that we have a Prime Minister who turned a blind eye to the CSIS reports, the intelligence reports, and instead allowed these elections to be interfered in by Beijing because it worked to his advantage. So that's a very sad day for democracy in Canada.
That's incredible. Rachel, some people are not happy with the fact that MPs received another raise recently. Not only is the carbon tax going up, but MPs, hey, the salaries went up, including yours. Was there ever any discussion by your party to decline the raises when so many Canadians are still struggling with the rising cost of living?
Yeah, certainly. I think it is a point well taken. There's legislation that's in place that members of parliament and senators, their wages go up year over year. There's nothing that we do for that or against that. It simply is. And so the government of the day would have to make a decision to put new legislation in place. That was something that we did when we were in power as Conservatives. Harper put a freeze on that. The Liberals have chosen to bring it back. That said, I would recognize that, yes, Canadians are struggling. And then I would have to beg the question, well, why is that? It's because of the current government that's in place right now. It's because their spending is totally out of control, which is driving up inflation. And it's because they're increasing taxes on Canadians. And so at the end of the day, Canadians are stuck with this massive bill. And the reality is that their employers are not keeping up with wage increases, in part because they can't, because they're finding it hard to run their businesses and to be able to make a profit, to be able to pay their employees well. So that's certainly part of it, which again comes down to government policy needing to change. And so I guess the conclusion I would offer is that, government matters, policy matters. And we should be looking to drive investment into our country. We should be looking to drive up wages because of that investment in our country. And ultimately, we should be looking to drive down the cost of living. Again, government policy and government spending has a lot to do with this.
NDP leader Jagmeet Singh says he'll continue to prop up the Trudeau government and not pull the plug on the coalition until at least 2025. So, Rachel, let me ask you something. You're on the Hill, you're in Ottawa right now. What do you think it will take for Singh to potentially pull the plug sooner rather than later?
Oh. Again, great question. I guess I would offer an observation perhaps, and that is, when I stand in the House day in and day out and I listen to the Liberal members of Parliament, this just happened yesterday. We were having a discussion with regards to the budget. So all day long, I listened to NDP members get up and rail on the government, either because there were things in the budget that they disagreed with, or there were things missing from the budget that they were hoping would be there. And so they spent the entire day debating and making points against the government. And then in the evening, it came for a vote. And what did the NDP do? They stood in favor with the government. So I find it interesting then that we have a party that is willing to speak out of one side of their face against the government, but then out of the other side of their face, they're willing to speak in favor of the government in the sense of a vote. And so the discrepancy there is one that I'm not able to reconcile. And I think it's difficult for a lot of Canadians to be able to reconcile. So at the end of the day, I'm not sure what it's going to take to break up this cozy union. But the NDP seem very dedicated to abandoning their principles and upholding this government no matter what it takes.
Wow. Rachel, there's still a massive doctor shortage in many parts of our province, including here in Lethbridge. Now, the UCPs say they're bringing in 17 more doctors. 6 are apparently practicing here, another 11, I think, expected by the end of the year. How important is that working relationship between the federal and provincial governments to address physician shortages, not just here in Alberta, but across the country?
Mm-hmm. This is definitely a significant issue in our area and has been for a little while now. And so I was pleased to see that we have 17 doctors coming into the city of Lethbridge. I think there's an opportunity there for sure for provincial, federal, and municipal governments to work well together. In order to address the shortage, we do have to bring individuals in from other countries. One of the things that our city and province have been working really well on is actually to streamline that process. So making sure that credentials are honored and that where there is extra training or education needed, that it's delivered in a timely fashion. And so there was actually a recent article that came out not too long ago that actually was praising the city of Lethbridge for its approach and its partnership with the province on this matter. And this is actually a model that's being looked at in other places of the country. So it's this effect where you're basically cutting back on the red tape, you're streamlining the process, you're making sure that people are credentialed properly, and that anything that needs to be brought up to date is in a quick manner. What this does then is it allows individuals to start practicing quite quickly. The other thing that's happening within the city of Lethbridge in order to attract doctors is actually just a really personal approach. One might call it hospitality. So essentially wanting to talk about the good things about Lethbridge and all that it has to offer, especially to those who might be looking to raise a family in our city. And it seems to be attracting the type of people who want to be in a small urban center like ours rather than the larger ones. And so by attracting those individuals who are looking for that type of environment, it means that they're more likely to stay rather than us losing them in a few years once their contract comes to an end.
Lethbridge Conservative MP and Canadian heritage critic Rachel Thomas, thanks so much for joining us today from our nation's capital.
Thanks, Hal. Good to be with you.
Alternate fuels have been the quest and subject of many discussions for a long time, but how about alternative sources for traditional fuels? For example, imagine if you could turn your trash and plastic waste into fuel for your car. Well, it is a concept that's actually being developed currently here in Alberta through a company called Cielo Waste Solutions, and their CEO, Ryan Jackson, joins me from Calgary to talk about these innovations. Ryan, welcome to Bridge City News. Great to have you on today.
Thanks, Jeanette. Glad to be here.
Great. Okay, so Ryan, tell us more about this. I went onto your website and I watched the video. It's very fascinating, and you're actually finding different ways to think about garbage, is what it sounds like. So maybe tell us about the company's mission.
Well, you know what? It's so I'd like to think of it more as a purpose, and I only because mission vision is so 90s. It's now time to really talk about what our purpose is, and our purpose is essentially to solve or to be a waste solutions company, to allow people to come to us with their waste problem. CP Rail is a good example with their railroad ties, which we've publicly announced, and say, help. How can you do something with this that doesn't have us take it to a landfill or burn them, whatever it is. And so we have a process called thermocatalytic depolymerization, and I have practiced that more than once, TCD, and our process and technology allows us to convert certain types of waste into a fuel.
Fascinating. Okay, so you're basically figuring out how to take waste, turn it into usable fuels for what? For airplanes, for cars, to power our houses, all of the above?
Currently we do have a way to, so what we do is our process has a stage where we put into the reactor, and along with the wood waste, for example, in the context of railroad ties, and we're going to be trialing other types of rubber and plastics as an example. But it goes in with a carrier fluid and a catalyst, and out the back of it comes a distillate, which then can be refined into diesel, jet fuel, and then a byproduct of it is naphtha, which is a diluent for pipelines and whatnot. So that, along with other compounds, we can also create with different types of feedstock as well, potentially as an additive in a chemical processing plant or anything of that nature.
Okay, so what kinds of wastes are we talking about that can be used? You mentioned the railroad ties. Can we use like any household trash literally that's going to the landfill?
We have the ability to process specific waste currently. And so the broader term of garbage, for example, it doesn't go into a blender and out comes some magic fuel. It's a little bit more complicated than that for us. So right now we're sorting through the specific waste streams that we're able to process efficiently. Obviously, the one that gets the most attention is the plastics mostly. And it's interesting because there's a lot of talk around plastics, but at the same time, a consistent, viable feedstock with respect to plastics is something that's a little bit more elusive in Canada than it is in other jurisdictions.
When you say feedstock, what exactly do you mean by that?
So waste. So basically, our feedstock is the waste that we refer to.
Okay, interesting. Okay, so how is this for the environment? How clean is this process?
So all of the process that we have is a closed loop. So what we get in the way of I guess, an off waste stream, we reintroduce into our process. So we do utilize, I paraphrase always, a meat processing facility where there's very little waste once they're through with everything. And that's essentially what our approaches as well. So from an emissions perspective, we incinerate what little waste gas there is off of the process, and our waste stream is essentially reintroduced back into the process to try and maximize efficiency. So we're in the single digits as far as our waste stream that comes off of the process.
Okay, how did this technology come to be? What was the motivating factor to develop this? It's quite interesting.
It was acquired from Germany actually back close to 10 years ago and brought over to this country. And of course, innovation in and of itself is created around people who take a good idea or a good initial process and create something good from it. And that's essentially what has happened here, is that the core technology or process that was brought over along with the catalyst and things of that nature that then evolved into what we have today.
Okay. Is this the first of this kind? You mentioned Germany. Is this the first of this kind in Canada? Are there other sort of companies developing this that you know of?
Our process is unique. So TCD, I'm not going to have to say it again, but TCD is essentially what we've been able to discern is that there's no other company using this type of approach. There are other people out there using a biofuel approach where it's Fischer-Tropsch and it's a gasification play or pyrolysis. There is heat involved in our process, and we do have to still crack, to use a chemical term. I'm a business guy, so that's about as far as you'll get from me. But it's unique in that perspective. There's some similarities in parts of our process, but TCD is unique for Cielo.
That's interesting. Okay, so you're in Calgary, but you have a new facility, I believe, in Aldersyde, Alberta? Okay.
We've had that facility for the better part of since 2018, actually.
Okay, wow.
It was an old biofuels plant that actually was mothballed. It was a failed Government of Alberta project to turn animal tallow from the neighboring meat processing facility near High River into biodiesel, and notwithstanding the failure, out of it came the opportunity for our founder and CEO at the time to buy it out of mothballs and utilize the facility and its infrastructure.
That's incredible. Okay, so how long does a project like this take to go from concept to market? It's still in the development stage, I believe, right?
We've proven the concept, so it's not a matter of us understanding if it works. We know it works. The biggest part now is actually the commercialization efforts that we're undertaking through additional data that we're going to be receiving from our Aldersyde facility. So that in and of itself will allow us to then build our first full-scale facility to take care of the railroad tie problem that CP Rail has.
Okay, so then from concept to finished product, how long could that take? I mean, you've had the Aldersyde one, the facility there for 5 years. This has been in development. So how long before this gets pushed out to market, do you think?
We've publicly stated in the press releases that we've done that we have an expectation that we'll be commissioning a facility in 2025.
Okay, wow, that's actually not that long from now. No.
Yeah.
Okay, so how much research and development did this take to get you to this current point where you are now?
A lot.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And innovation, as I mentioned earlier, it really comes on the back of failure. The more you try, the more you fail, the more you learn. And I think that through the course of the Aldersyde experiment and project, and it was successful in allowing us to get to proof of concept. And once we got to that point, we had to actually take a step back and run through what we knew to be true and build the current skid or the current facility as we know it today. And we're going to be commissioning that facility this month. And that is the, I don't want to say the finished product, but that is the nexus, if you will, of what we ended up achieving, which is the learnings from the Aldersyde since the beginning, and also, of course, the initial concept that we brought over from Germany.
Okay. Well, you talked about obviously trial and error and success and failure. So maybe talk a little bit about some of the challenges that you've faced or are currently facing.
Yeah, I mean, we've run into, and I mean, it's really about understanding the interaction. And again, now I'm going down into what I've only been told by the folks that obviously do this kind of work, because I'm just a business guy. But we've learned a lot about the interaction between the catalyst, our carrier fluid, and the feedstock or the waste that we were talking about earlier. So really perfecting that balance and understanding how it reacts and how it comes into, essentially the distillate or that intermediate product I mentioned as well. It really does take a lot of time perfecting the recipe, if you want to call it that, and understanding that, you're not going to, bake cookies at 600 degrees Fahrenheit if you want them to cook faster. There's a sweet spot that you have to hit. And that's essentially a lot of what had to happen. And then you have plugging issues that you were going to be dealing with because you would create too much of a reaction too quickly, and that would, it would coke things up. So there's a lot of technical, expertise that goes into this. And a lot of it, quite frankly, is art as much as it is science to really understand the perfect balance.
Oh, I can 100% imagine for sure. So Ryan, who do you see using this product in the long run? Is it meant for everyone, or who's your main customer base?
Well, it's interesting because we have actually three main sources of revenue. So the first one is that waste solutions that we provide in the way of receiving a tipping fee for the waste that people bring to us. So I'll reference again CP Rail as an example. And then the other revenue stream that we will quantify a lot more in the future. We don't need to have this to be able to be profitable, but that's the carbon credits that we're going to receive off of the process that we might anticipate. And then the third thing is it's a fuel. So if we produce a marine diesel or a highway diesel or a sustainable aviation fuel, the nice thing about this is that the market is there and it's extremely large. And so a place that we already have a market for our finished product. It's not like guessing with the cannabis sector, for an example. When they legalized cannabis, nobody really knew how big the cannabis market was. We know now it's not as big as we thought it was going to be. But we really actually do know that there is a market for this product, especially a sustainable product, that what we provide into the market is more than adequate to be able to sell and receive revenue for it.
Okay. And how does this product compare with petrochemicals taken out of the ground?
That one, yeah. And when I saw that, so petrochemical uses a non-renewable resource. And again, I'm just the business guy. I can't reiterate that enough. Anybody who has a chemical engineering degree is probably doing one of these. But a petrochemical facility, if you use, for example, if you're using methane or methanol, you're using natural gas as your feedstock, and you're using a lot of heat, and you're using that to crack those molecules into a methanol product. Whereas our process is using a waste material, a catalyst, and the carrier fluid I mentioned earlier. So they're not using a waste stream, we are. That's about all I can tell you.
Right, yeah. Well, it's kind of a win-win. You're taking waste that's going into a landfill or into the ocean, like the plastics, and then you're turning it into something that's actually usable. It's a fascinating concept, absolutely. So you had mentioned 2025, but where do you see this in 5 years?
Well, I mean, from a business perspective, we're looking at the low-hanging fruit, the biggest problem that we can solve with the least amount of effort. And so once we essentially achieve, for example, and realize on the type of waste streams that we can identify that are going to be both solving a big problem for our customer, but also, and as important, it also generates a margin that we can actually say that to our shareholders that we're acting responsibly on both sides of the equation, both with your money and with the environment. I think that the best option is to say we'll have grown to a point where we've solved certain sector problems. Because remember, we're not a fuels producer. That's our byproduct that we produce by taking care of a waste stream. So it's important for us. That's why we're called Cielo Waste Solutions and not Cielo Oil and Gas.
Interesting. Okay.
Right. So we'll continue to develop our technology. We're only in, even though we're at, we'll call it a 10-year overnight success, we really do have a lot more that we can learn. And the first plant we build at commercial scale will tell us a lot. So in 5 years, I'd like to think that we have a lot more of them. And feedstock, though, informs that. The waste stream has to be consistent, and it has to be there. Otherwise, we can't produce. So that's probably the biggest part of this equation, is getting a sustainable, profitable feedstock into our facility.
Okay, yeah, and it sounds like your main customers would be those that produce the most amount of waste on a consistent basis. Yeah,
absolutely. Rubber's a good example too, right? And not to belabor the point, but we all change tires. We all still continue to drive on the road and everything else. The plastics issue in Canada is starting to change. The landscape is changing. They're banning single-use plastics. It's not as easy to find a waste stream for plastics in Canada. But remember, we're a globally focused company. So we're not looking solely at solving a Canadian problem. We're looking at solving a global problem.
And Ryan, we are out of time here, but it's really quick. If people want to know more about this, how can they find out more?
You know what? The best thing, like what you did, is go to cielows.com and take a look, and certainly reach out to investors at cielows.com as well if you have any questions.
Sounds great. Thanks so much for joining us today, Ryan. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Absolutely. Ryan Jackson is the CEO of Cielo Waste Solutions. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks so much for watching.